Need to take attendance very quickly because I've seen a lot of you before. Julia here. Unique. Karen. Kevin. Elena. What? I just approved, and I don't think Kevin's going to mess up yet, but I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. What's your name? Yagani. Okay, this is the Kritiks 101 lecture. I assume we've talked about Ks to some degree, but this will be a more comprehensive overview of what they are and their role in debate. So critiques are arguments that question the basic assumptions that go into the crafting of the plan or the maintenance of debate itself. They're often described as a priori arguments. Similar to topicality, because in SKR 1, the argument follows that we should evaluate any other part of the debate because it should not have occurred. It's unethical or what have you. To give a brief history of what critiques are when they were first introduced to debate, they came about in the early 90s as a unique form of argument that had its roots in German philosophy and questions of things like being and existence, which are obviously big picture philosophical questions that are hard to answer, but were attempted to by philosophers like G.W. Hegel and Martin Heidegger. Some argue that because of the English spelling of critique was already used in debate in the context of RFPs and feedback that judges give people when they are done debating, that instead it was chosen to use the German spelling, which is K-R-I-T-I-K, obviously still pronounced as critique. But that is why when we talk about critiques, we shorten it to just the K, because it comes from that German spelling. So here are the major components of the K. One is the link. This is self-explanatory. I'm sure we've all talked about what a link comprises in any argument, right? It's how your argument relates to the plan. And we can talk about examples. Two is the impact. This should also be fairly self-explanatory. I'm sure we've talked about what an impact to a dissent looks like. It's something like extinction or great power war that has a massive effect on the world. And a K debate, that's usually not the case, but again, we can talk about that in a bit. But it's the reason why the argument matters. Three is the alternative. Which is often just shortened to the alt. The alternative is literally the alternative course of action or way of thinking that is supposed to resolve the Lincoln impact as it is attached to the plan. The alternative is probably the most complex component of the K. So I'll give a brief overview of what it usually looks like. As you can see, the link and impact is similar to any GA shell, but the alt you can think of as, well, sometimes it's referred to this pejoratively, but it's not wrong, a utopian counterplan that is supposed to solve the link and DA as the link and impact as its own little DA. The alternative is oftentimes where K debaters get caught up or stumble in debates because it's extremely hard to explain the course of action that it prescribes for what's known as the telos of the argument. So if you're running the K, you should have this really thought out and be prepared to answer cross-ex questions because these are things that it is hard for a lot of debaters to explain. A lot of K debaters are very competent at explaining why the plan is bad and what that does and how that affects the world, but it is very hard for a lot of debaters to explain how the alternative or how rethinking something will actually resolve that occurring, will actually resolve why the plan is bad. Essentially, if judges are unclear about what the alternative does and how it relates to the rest of the debate, they'll usually just default to the simplicity of the plan because it's pretty self-explanatory what the plan does. It's in the text. You'll notice that this basic setup of the K is missing something that you would see in a disad. What is that? Does anybody know? Sure. Yeah. The K is missing a uniqueness component because part of the argument is that the impact to the critique is endemic. It's not just isolated to the plan. So the alternative is some large way of rethinking or changing the way we usually take action to resolve a link and impact that it cannot be argued happens in one specific case. So we'll move on to talking about K strategy more generally. Although it is important to note that in a K shell, there can be multiple links and there can be multiple impacts depending on how much time you plan to invest into reading the K in 1 and C. But you get one alt. Everybody gets just one. You have to pick one. K strategy. So critiques usually fall into two different camps. This certainly isn't exhaustive, but the great majority of them do. The first that we'll talk about are what are called the policy debaters K, or policy Ks. This is entirely subjective, but does describe a specific genre of critique, because some Ks require more technical and line-by-line debating than others. Here are some examples of policy Ks for the policy debaters K. The first is the cap K. We've all heard of the cap K, right? What does the cap K argue fundamentally? Right. So the argument is that capitalism equals bad, and the plan equals capitalist. The reason why I put this under the policy debaters K section is multifold. The cap K argues that capitalism is bad and that the app is capitalist, as we just stated. But this can be read as part of what's called a flex strategy, short for flexible strategy, as part of a multiple alt strategy. So you can read the cap K with things like your disads, with T arguments, with the counterplan, etc. The cap K requires precision in debating because impact calculus is paramount when answering things like cap is sustainable, or capitalism is good, or transition wars occur in the world of the alternative, which are all arguments that policy teams will make, app teams will make in response to the cap K, and which need to be answered if you hope to win the debate. So it requires more extensive argumentation. The second policy K we'll talk about is the security K. Is anybody familiar with the security K and what its argument is? I thought I heard somebody say the only K they'll go for is security before the lecture.
Isn't it kind of, it's like saying that the app then is like securitizing the impact.
Yeah, exactly. So the app is an example of what's called securitization. So what this means is that the app has created representations of certain security threats, i.e. for e.g. its impact scenarios like terrorism arguments or global nuclear war. And the security K falls under the genre of policy Ks because it requires a lot of text and line-by-line debating, because wrapped up in this one critique is sort of an impact argument about all of the app's impacts being based on faulty logic or simply being untrue. So in winning the security K, you not only need to win the arguments that are wrapped up in your specific critique, but you need to win arguments pertaining to the case and a lot of times impact defense as reasons why the app's case is simply wrong. This K also makes several statements about IR theory as a whole, so that's a larger debate that you get into when you read security, i.e. a lot of apps will defend a normal IR paradigm like realism or liberalism. Does anybody know what realism and liberalism is? Realism is the idea in international relations that every state is essentially self-interested. So it's a way of explaining conflicts when those interests collide. Liberalism is an IR paradigm that contends that conflicts can be resolved through things like free market trade and economic ties. The security K is part of the third school of IR theory, which is known as constructivism, which essentially argues that interpersonal and international relationships are complex and can be explained through individual psychological sort of manifestations of people's individual wills. So you need to win that constructivism is a better paradigm of viewing IR and the world to win the security game. The third sort of policy K that we'll talk about, and this is much more subjective than the other two, is the FemK, but specifically FemIR. So what does it sound like, or if you're familiar, what is the argument that the FemK makes? Fem is short for what? Yep. Yeah. It's a paradigm of feminism. And wrapped up in this is the basic idea that the world is sort of patriarchal. It's ruled by men in a way that is destructive. So the FemK and FemIRKs will argue that the app is in some way tied to patriarchy. It is patriarchal. And due to that, it needs to be rejected. The reason why this falls into the policy bears K section and not the second genre K that we'll talk about soon is because the FemK is often used in a flex strategy that we talked about as a means of buttressing things like your disads and topicality arguments and counterclaims with a bit more nuance than the cap K for security. The impact to the FemK or the FemIRK can also be similar to a lot of impacts to disads. So an example of this is a lot of teams will argue that patriarchy causes extinction because of things like increased propensity for conflict amongst nations that want to sort of project a masculine image and attachment to power, or things like environmental degradation, because it's argued that taking advantage of the earth is a means of men extending their control over things that they want to prove that they can control. The reason why this also requires a lot of tech debating is specifically if you're reading FemIR, it pertains to IR paradigms like we talked about with the security case. So that's another like larger debate that you have to get into. We'll specifically talk about theory, or when I say theory, I don't mean debate theory. I mean the broader theory and strategy to running a policy K, and generally the arguments that you need to win if you hope to win the critique. So these are oftentimes called K bombs, because if these arguments are conceded or unanswered by the app, it makes it very difficult for the app to win the debate, even if they're a relatively small part of the 1 and 0 2 and Z. So we'll go over a few of them. The first that we'll talk about is structural violence. So what do you think this sounds like? It's violence that is entailed by a structure, usually the structure of a specific society or a specific institution. The argument essentially is that the app furthers or does nothing to stop ongoing smaller or slow violences, like economic oppression of the lower class or women, and lives lost in favor of focusing on impacts that achieve the most in terms of body counts, like nuclear war or great power war, represent, I guess, a covering up of these smaller impacts. So it's coupled with a very important impact calculus argument, which is that magnitude first hides these impacts, and that large magnitude impacts have a very small probability of occurring, especially in comparison to structural violence, because it's ongoing. It has a 100% chance of occurring. It's occurring now. Because of this, it makes it extremely hard for the app to win if they have neglected something like structural violence or probability first, because their impacts essentially are called into question as being a means of stifling discussion of smaller impacts. So it forces the app to go for something silly like no case or debate, in debate, or something that's usually an uphill battle like permutation. Second, we'll talk about values of life. This is also kind of self-explanatory. It's contained in the title. And this is another impact argument that can mean the difference between a neg ballot and an app ballot. Values of life, or it's often shortened to VTL, is the impact claim that the app saves lives, but at the expense of those lives saved ability to live a full or happy life. So things like worker alienation and economic slow violence mean that the people the app saves are unable to live well or to their fullest. Winning this argument can oftentimes move the entire app, because it means the app's ability to solve things like extinction literally do not matter, because the people who would otherwise go extinct have no reason to continue living. The third argument we'll talk about is genocide. So I'm not going to explain what genocide is, because we all pretty much know that it's horrible and should never occur. But in comparison to the app, genocide is oftentimes argued to be a larger impact than Great Power War extinction. Essentially, it is another large impact like those two things, but it makes impact framing difficult for the app, because there are a lot of authors who write about genocide and also write about the ethics of allowing it to occur. The argument is that letting the world destroy itself would sometimes be preferable to letting it continue in existence if it's going to engage in horribly unethical actions like genocide of people. So essentially, this is an impact claim that argues that genocide has in some means a larger magnitude than the app. And if the app doesn't answer this, then you can run with it. The third or fourth K bomb we'll talk about is simply ethics. So I'm also assuming we all have a general idea of what ethics are. But similar to the above, ethics impacts are important for both the app and the neg because they really solidify the claim that the K is an a priori issue a la T. If the app is unethical, it should not have been allowed in debate because it has already stated things that will do things like make people feel excluded, make people feel generally uncomfortable. It should not have been spoken at all because it was an unethical act. The last that we'll talk about here is epistemology. As I'm sure you have heard at one point in Garrett's lectures, epistemology is the study of knowledge and entails theories of how knowledge is produced. If the neg wins that the app's epistemology is wrong, they have successfully argued that everything the app has argued is based off of some sort of faulty logic, and therefore it's not credible. So nothing the app has said really matters in a world where the app's ability to say those things were reached by faulty conclusions. So that's all I want to talk about regarding specific K impact strategies to policy Ks. But you will notice one thing about all of these. Which component of the K shell do you think that these would belong in? So like structural violence, is that a link? Is that an impact or is that an alternative? Yeah, it's an impact. All of these arguments are impact arguments. Usually if you win the debate on something smaller when you're arguing for the critique, it's on an impact argument because the app's always going to say something large about its impacts and why they should outweigh the K. Going to erase this so we can talk about the second major kind of thing. So in opposition to more policy-style Ks, or Ks that require a lot of tech and line-by-line debating, rest holistic Ks. Again, policy Ks and holistic Ks aren't an exhaustive list of the kinds of Ks that you can read, but nevertheless describe a good amount of them. So the difference between a flex K or policy K and a holistic K is that the holistic K will be part of a one-off strategy that oftentimes rejects a lot of norms of debate, like the presentation of specific arguments. So. You say nothing but the K, and therefore you're stuck with it. You have to extend it unless you want to go for just the case debate, which is almost never a good thing. You have essentially indebted yourself to this position, so you have to make some trickier arguments that you normally wouldn't even consider when going for something like a dis-ed. So lots of times a holistic K will involve something like poetry, or song, or dance, or even the playing of a video, or some other performance. And at other times it will just include something like a narrative, a personal story, or a story of someone else that reflects a larger argument. I won't include a list of examples of these because there isn't really one holistic K that encompasses what they all look like, but they're mutable enough that explaining what they generally look like means that I hope to explain how they'll appear in your debates and how to structure your responses to them. So just like with policy case, I'll talk about the specific K bonds that exist for these. So if any of these arguments are conceded, again, this makes it extremely difficult for the app to come back in the debate, because, especially with holistic case, they really undermine all of the app's fundamental positions. So the first thing we'll talk about is alternative framework. Or framework on the neg. Alternative framework is the argument that the app's impact should be discounted entirely. It's paramount for the app to win in circumstances where the neg has said alternative framework or advocated for an alternative framework, that fairness is an impact that is worth considering, and that this K makes debating impossible for the app because it moves all of their best options. Likewise, the neg should be arguing that the app makes debate harder for schools with things like fewer resources, or for whom debate is exploitative or inaccessible, and should be discounted for buying into a totally corrupt system. So that's why these arguments are both characterized as framework arguments, because they both make larger theoretical claims about how debate operates and how it should operate. The second is form over content. So this is essentially the argument that the content of the app's speech does not matter as much as its form or presentation. It's similar to alternative framework, although this argument is often packaged with a critique of traditional policy debate as being sort of decentered or lacking embodiment of its arguments, and therefore not producing organic scholarship, because it's argued that most people don't have a visceral personal attachment to things like Common Core standards, although that may be a bad example for this topic, because I'm sure a lot of you have dealt with Common Core standards. But most people don't have a visceral personal connection to things like emissions policies, or what they advocate the app should do to deal with things like carbon emissions, a la the college topic last year. The reason why that's important as well is because a lot of teams argue that organic scholarship is more important than things like traditional policy scholarship, because organic scholarship is discounted in the academy, and therefore presenting it is a means of making it more acceptable. The third thing that we'll talk about is poetics. So poetics is a very complicated concept that's written about in multiple settings with differing takes from multiple authors. And typically in debate, it's an argument that advocates for a specific set of poetics. And advocates will argue that this is the only means of debating or performance that can successfully encompass a person's identity or how they relate to the world. So this is an inaccessibility argument, which is wrapped up in a theoretical claim about the nature of the world itself and how people exist within it. Yeah. Yeah. And what? Okay. So poetics is an important argument for the neg to win, because if they do win it, they have won the argument. The app's form of debate is oppressive, insofar as the neg is expected to engage in the same version of debate and not produce its own poetics. fourth thing that we'll talk about is term affect. Affect is the argument that the app has failed to create an emotional connection between its content / performance and the judge or other audience members of the round. And oftentimes arguments that argue for an affective relationship between arguments heard and arguments voted on argue that strong and sometimes even negative emotions are necessary to change the politics of debate or the status quo as a whole. So in these debates, the app must read affect answers or it really won't have any grounds to defend itself. If it involves two debaters like spreading through speeches about common core standards, killing everyone on the planet, etc. There are many more of these holistic K-bombs, but this is a short overview of the most common ones and what the app will have to answer in these debates if it has any hope of winning. Because these debates specifically, a lot of app teams simply don't know what to do with themselves. And so they make the mistake of simply not answering somewhat simple arguments, or arguments that are easy to answer if you really know what's going on, and if you're prepared to answer them. Does anybody have any questions about holistic case or policy case? Okay. So the next thing that we'll talk about is app strategy and answering mechanic. This should be the section that you pay most attention to if you don't plan on being a K debater, because this is about not only what should be allowed from the negative in the debate, but it's also arguments as to why the app is more important in debates where the negative has read a K. So here are just a host of generic arguments that you should be reading against the K just about every debate where it pops up. The first framework is a theoretical position pertaining to what the neg should be able to do and what the app needs to do for things to be fair in the debate. The most common, and I would say the most reasonable rendition of these arguments is that the app should be able to weigh the consequences of the plan versus the actualization of the alternative, which is essentially like a fancy way of saying we should get our shit. We should get our impacts through red in the 1AC. A more conservative approach to this argument is that Ks are cheating and kill all policy education, but you shouldn't say that. It's not a good argument. Obviously, this is entirely important for the app to be able to say anything in response to the K, because if you're not winning framework, you're not winning that anything you're saying is necessarily important to your position. The next thing that we'll talk about is utilitarianism, oftentimes shortened to util. This is really needed in every single K debate. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Util lets you weigh your impacts because it's a magnitude first argument, and your impacts will always be larger than the negs if they're running a K, generally. Util is an effective way of arguing magnitude first, because util arguments are often slightly philosophical themselves in answering things like ethics turns to the means of impact calculus, because they'll say util is the most ethical way of evaluating impacts because it weighs everyone's lives equally, etc. The next answer is simply termed death first most of the time. This is important for answering the impacts that aren't just structural violence or genocide. The argument is usually as simple as death removes our ability to make things better or to re-theorize the world. So we should consider the app's implications for how we live our lives or whether or not we can live our lives. Because if we die, you only get to die once. So obviously, you say this the most in K debates. The last that we'll talk about, and again, these are just generics, like you can say a lot more and you should in most debates that are specific to the critique. But the last argument is the permutation. I'm sure that we had the counterclaims lecture already, right? Okay, so what is the permutation? Or what is a permutation argument? Yep, so that's one permutation. Essentially, the permutation is an argument that you can combine the plan and counterplan in some way that resolves the net benefit, or that proves they are not mutually exclusive. So in K debates, especially with Ks that are being read that don't come with a strong link argument, the permutation is super important and can be read similar to what you would say in response to a counterplan, but instead in response to the alternative. So you would say, like with the CP, perm do both. And like with the CP, you would argue that this solves the impact of the K. This is especially important, like I said, in debates where there's a weak link argument, but also debates where what is called a link omission has been read. So that's not emission like E emission, it's emission like O emission. And the argument is that the link argument that the negative is made is less of something that the plan has actively done or will actively do, and more that it's something that it actively hasn't done or actively won't do. I.e., you don't discuss patriarchy, therefore you're not feminist, therefore you are patriarchal. That is an example of what is termed a link omission. So in those debates, the permutation will be super important because it definitely resolves, or there's a large case to be made for resolving the net benefit of K.